He came to Seoul's most exclusive bridal atelier to buy a dress for another woman. Instead, he found the one he'd spent 15 years trying to forget, standing 30 feet away, more beautiful than the ghost that haunted him, with a 14-year-old girl at her side who had his exact eyes. That one moment will unravel everything he built on the lie that she left him willingly. If you've been waiting for a story about power, betrayal, a father who arrives 15 years too late, and a woman who survived everything his world threw at her, this is it. Watch until the end. Hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Oh. The morning Ryu Jae-hyun walked into Atelier Seo felt like every other morning of his adult life. Controlled, purposeful, and faintly suffocating. His driver had pulled the black G-Wagon to the curb on Cheongdam-dong's quietest block at 9:43, precisely when the atelier opened its doors to clients by appointment only. Jae-hyun stepped out without waiting for the door to be opened for him. He never waited. Waiting implied uncertainty, and uncertainty was the one luxury his position could not afford. He wore a charcoal suit cut so precisely it looked like it had been constructed around his body rather than placed upon it, which it had. No tie. Open collar. The scar along his left jawline caught the pale October light in the way it always did. A thin white seam running from beneath his ear to the edge of his chin, the kind of scar that made people look twice and then quickly look away. Two men followed him at a distance, close enough to be useful, far enough to suggest he didn't need them. Inside, the atelier was exactly what its reputation promised. Hushed, achingly white, smelling of gardenias and something older and drier underneath, like the breath of serious money. The floors were pale marble. The gowns on their individual stands were spaced wide apart, as if they required room to exist. A woman in a fitted black dress materialized from behind a frosted glass partition and bowed deeply. "Chairman Ryu, we've prepared the selections you requested." "I'll look myself first," he said. His voice was not loud. It never needed to be. The woman bowed again and retreated. Jae-hyun moved along the first row of gowns without touching them. This was a transaction, not an occasion. Baek Yuna needed a wedding dress suited to a union that would consolidate two of Seoul's most dangerous and publicly respectable families, Ryu and Baek. And Jae-hyun's only criteria were that it broadcast appropriate dominance without tipping into vulgarity. Yuna herself had opinions, but her opinions were secondary to the image the marriage needed to project. He had been told this was not a romantic way to approach a wedding. He had been told many things that did not particularly interest him. He stopped before a column of ivory silk with a cathedral train that probably cost more than most families in this city would earn in a year. He studied it the way he studied everything, looking not at what it was, but at what it communicated. That was when he heard the laugh. It came from the far side of a curved partition to his left. A low, warm sound, quickly suppressed, like someone who had trained themselves not to take up too much space with their joy. He didn't think anything of it. He turned back to the gown. Then he heard the voice that followed the laugh. "Mira, please, don't touch the hem." Everything in him stopped. It was not a dramatic stopping. His heart continued. His lungs continued. The marble under his feet did not shift. But something in the deep, involuntary architecture of Ryu Jae-hyun, something that lived beneath the suits and the scar and the 15 years of building walls in the approximate shape of a man, went completely, catastrophically still. He knew that voice. He had spent 15 years forgetting it. He had spent 15 years being nearly successful. He moved around the partition before he had decided to move. It was not a choice he made. His body made it for him. The way a body moves toward something it recognizes as essential, as bone-level necessary, before the reasoning mind can weigh in with its objections. She was standing with her back partially to him, holding a fabric swatch against the light from a tall window. She was wearing a camel-colored coat, simple, well-fitted, but not expensive. Her natural hair pulled back and held with something he couldn't see. She was slightly thinner than he remembered, or perhaps she had simply shed the particular softness that youth provides and replaced it with something more exact, more present. Beside her stood a girl. The girl was 14, maybe 15. She was wearing a school uniform with the jacket open over a gray hoodie, arms crossed, wearing the expression of someone who had been brought somewhere they hadn't chosen to be. She was beautiful in the specific, unfinished way of adolescence, all sharp angles waiting to resolve. And she had, in the exact, unmistakable geometry of her eyes, his eyes. The precise tilt, the particular stillness, the fabric swatch slipped from Nia's hand. No, it didn't slip. She felt him. He watched it happen, watched the subtle seizing of her shoulders, the way her body registered a threat it recognized before her conscious mind caught up. She turned slowly, not dramatically. The way a person turns when they already know what they're going to see and are simply giving themselves the last half second before they have to face it. Her eyes found him across 15 feet of pale marble. Nia Bellamy, who had been Nia Ryu for 3 years and then had not been, who had vanished from his life one night without a note, and without a goodbye, and had taken something from him that he hadn't fully understood the dimensions of until this exact moment, looked at him and went the color of old ash. The girl looked between them. Jae-hyun realized he was holding a dress receipt. He did not remember picking it up. He did not remember the woman in black placing it in his hand. He was looking at Nia's face, and the receipt was in his fingers, and then it was on the marble floor, and he had no memory of releasing it. The room had not gone silent, because rooms do not go silent on their own, but the atelier staff had, with the finely tuned social radar of people whose business survived on reading rooms, all found reasons to exist elsewhere. His 2 men had stopped at the entry to the partition. He didn't look back at them. He couldn't look away from her. The girl stepped forward, not backward. Forward. She put herself between Nia and Jae-hyun with the automatic, instinctive motion of someone who had been doing exactly this, standing in front of her mother, for years without ever being taught how. She looked up at him with those eyes, his eyes, and her jaw was set in a way that he recognized because he had set his jaw exactly like that in mirrors for 4 decades. He opened his mouth. What came out was barely above a breath. Nia. She looked at him for a long moment. The color had come back to her face. Not warmth, but the controlled flush of someone managing something enormous in real time. She glanced at her daughter, at his face, at the floor, at his face again. Her expression was not grief. It was not joy. It was something older and more complicated than either. The look of a person confronting the one thing they had successfully outrun for 15 years and understanding, finally, that it had simply been waiting. "Don't," she said. One word. No inflection, not a plea and not a threat. Just a boundary drawn in the only syllable she had available. The girl, Mira, had not looked away from him. Her arms were still crossed. Her expression was wary and direct, and she looked at him the way people look at an approaching weather system, assessing damage potential. Jae-hyun looked at her eyes. He looked at her eyes and understood something that restructured every assumption he had built his last 15 years upon. He said nothing else. He could not have spoken if his life required it. He turned and walked back through the partition and across the white marble and out of the atelier's front door into the cold October air and stood on the sidewalk of Cheongdam-dong and breathed. His driver appeared at his shoulder. "Chairman? Not now." "Should I get in the car?" He stood on the sidewalk for another 90 seconds. The air tasted like exhaust and money, and the beginning of something he could not name and was not sure he would survive. Then he got in the car. He did not go home. He went to his father's office. The Ryu family building in Gangnam had been built in 1987 by Jae-hyun's grandfather to announce, in glass and concrete, the arrival of a family that had no intention of remaining invisible. Jae-hyun had occupied the top floor since his father's death 3 years ago. He rarely went to the sub-level floors, the administrative levels, the record levels, the archival rooms that held 30 years of business documentation in the form of files no competent attorney should ever see, and no one had ever been competent enough to take from them. He went now to his father's private storage room on sub-level 2. His father, Ryu Sung-jin, had been a careful man, brutal in the specific, accountant-precise way of men who understand that violence is only useful when it's cheaper than the alternative. He had kept records of everything. Jae-hyun had known this. He had also, until this morning, believed that he had reviewed everything relevant in the months following his father's death. He had been wrong. The sealed file was in a fireproof cabinet behind a wall panel that Jae-hyun knew existed because he had put it there himself. at his father's instruction when he was 22 years old. He had never been given the combination. His father had given it to him 3 days before he died, and Jae-hyun had written it down and put it in his wallet and had, for 3 years, not used it. He used it now. The file was not large. His father had been economical with documentation, only what was necessary, no more. Inside the folder were 11 photographs, a single-page typed document, and 3 bank transfer receipts. The photographs were surveillance shots, time-stamped. The first was dated 15 years ago, 2 months after Nia had disappeared from his life. She was visibly pregnant in it, standing outside a building he didn't recognize, not in Seoul. The image was grainy with distance and the resolution of a camera that had been positioned to observe without being noticed. She was carrying a bag over one shoulder and looking at something off-frame. And even in the poor quality of the photograph, even across 15 years and a two-dimensional rendering, the expression on her face was one that Jae-hyun felt in a physical location, somewhere below his sternum, a place that had been numb for so long he had assumed it was simply dead. She looked terrified, and she looked like someone who had decided to be terrified quietly, without troubling anyone with it. The typed document was 6 paragraphs. His father's voice, clipped, transactional, in every sentence. It outlined an arrangement made with Kwon Tae-oh, Jae-hyun's most trusted lieutenant and his father's longest-serving soldier. The arrangement was simple. Nia Bellamy, Jae-hyun's wife, was to be removed from Seoul without public incident. No violence. His father had underlined this with a single precise stroke, but permanently. Financial support for relocation. A signed document from Nia releasing her claim to the Ryu name and assets, obtained under circumstances the document was careful not to specify. Travel arranged to the United States. Contact prohibited. The final line of the document read, "She will agree. She has no other options." Jae-hyun read that line twice. He set the document down on the floor of the storage room and sat there for a moment with his hands on his knees, breathing in the cold smell of the subterranean space, the age and the dust, and the dry bureaucratic odor of things kept hidden. He had spent 15 years believing Nia left him. She had been taken from him. He had spent 15 years in the specific, corrosive grief of a man who believed he had been chosen against, who had watched the person he loved most decide that he was not worth staying for, and had absorbed that verdict like a sentence and lived inside it. He had become harder and more controlled, and had placed a measured distance between himself and any human being who tried to come close, not because he didn't want closeness, but because he had decided he was the kind of man who drove people away. His father had built that verdict. His father had planted it in the soil of Nia's removal and watched it grow into the man currently sitting on a concrete floor in a sub-level storage room, holding bank transfer receipts made out to Kwon Tae-oh for services rendered. Services rendered. He stood. He put the file back inside the cabinet. He closed it, locked it, and stood there with his hand flat against the metal surface for a moment that had no particular meaning except that he needed something solid under his palm. Then he went back upstairs and called his most discreet investigator and gave her one instruction: find out everything about Nia Bellamy's current life and have it on his desk by morning. Nothing intrusive, no contact, observation only. He sat in his office and watched the city below and did not think about the 14-year-old girl with his eyes. He tried not to think about the 14-year-old girl with his eyes. He failed. Nia Bellamy's apartment was on the 14th floor of a building in Mapo-gu that was clean and well-maintained and had a lobby with one security desk and an intercom system that was several models behind the current standard. The neighborhood was a specific kind of Seoul middle distance from glamour. Not poor, not wealthy, the type of place where professionals with children and limited overhead lived their actual lives, unperformed for anyone. The investigator's report told him the apartment had 2 bedrooms. Nia had lived there for 6 years. She worked as a freelance textile consultant for a firm that sourced fabric for mid-range Korean fashion brands, which explained, he realized, the atelier. She worked from home 4 days a week. The 5th day, she made rounds to clients in Mapo and Yongsan. She earned enough. The daughter was enrolled at a middle school 4 blocks from the apartment. She was in the top quartile of her class. She played basketball, which she had apparently picked up somewhere around age 10, and taken to with an intensity that her teachers found impressive and slightly alarming. She had a small number of close friends, and no social media presence that the investigator could locate, which the report noted as unusual for a girl her age. The daughter's name was Mira. Her registered name was Mira Bellamy. The birth certificate listed father unknown. He read that twice, too. Father unknown. He was 41 years old. He ran the largest privately held criminal organization in the greater Seoul metropolitan area. He had, in the course of his professional life, ordered beatings, organized extortion, overseen money laundering on a scale that would have made the prosecutors who occasionally circled his business weep with frustrated ambition. He had buried 2 members of his own organization who had become liabilities. He had done every one of these things with the flat effect of a man performing routine professional tasks. He had never, in his adult life, felt what he felt reading the words "Father Unknown" on a document about his own daughter. His hand was shaking. He put it flat on the desk until it stopped. The next morning, he sent a message through an intermediary to Nia's personal phone, a number the investigator had pulled. The message was 4 sentences. He was aware that she had every right to not respond. He was aware that showing up at her apartment would be a form of violence regardless of his intentions, and that whatever he was trying to rebuild, if he was trying to rebuild anything, if rebuilding was even the correct frame for what he was doing, it could not begin with another imposition on a woman his family had already imposed upon sufficiently. He sent the message and waited. Kwon Tae-oh came to his office that afternoon, which was a Thursday, as he did every Thursday. He was 53, lean and precise, with gray at his temples that he wore with the comfortable vanity of a man who had earned it. He had served the Ryu family for 28 years. He had, at Jae-hyun's father's direction, arranged the removal of Jae-hyun's pregnant wife from the country. He sat across from Jae-hyun and went through the weekly organizational report with the unhurried efficiency of a man who believed himself to be completely safe. Jae-hyun listened. He asked his usual questions. He approved the usual allocations. He looked at Taeo's face across the desk and watched him perform the role of trusted lieutenant with the comfort of long practice, and he felt something cold and patient settling into the space behind his eyes. Not now. That accounting would come, but not now. Not until he understood the full picture. Not until he knew what Nia wanted. After Tae-oh left, Jae-hyun sat alone in his office for a long time. He thought about the girl in the school uniform with her arms crossed and his eyes. He thought about how she had stepped in front of her mother without hesitation, without thinking about whether it was tactically wise, just moved, her body simply deciding that the space between her mother and danger was hers to occupy. He had no right to be proud of that. He had done nothing to produce it. It was Nia's work entirely. He was proud of it anyway, which disgusted him in a way that felt like progress. Nia's response came at 11:47 that night. He was awake. He had been awake for several hours sitting in his living room in the dark, which was new behavior for him and which he suspected was going to become a recurring problem. The message said, "I need 24 hours. Don't contact Mira. Don't contact anyone connected to me. I'll tell you where and when." He wrote back, "Understood." He put the phone down. He picked it up again and typed, "I'm sorry I didn't look for you sooner." He stared at those words for a long time. He deleted them. Not because they weren't true, because they were insufficient, and sending insufficient things to Nia at 11:47 at night while she was making decisions about whether to allow him into her life felt like exactly the kind of self-indulgence that had already cost them too much. He put the phone down. Outside, Seoul was doing what Seoul did, generating its steady, enormous noise, its light, its relentless forward motion. The Han River was 3 kilometers from his window. He had crossed it the night Nia disappeared. He had crossed it looking for her, not understanding that she was already gone, that the entire architecture of her absence had been built without his knowledge, that he was searching a city that had been carefully emptied of the one thing he was searching for. He had crossed the river and found nothing and come home and told himself that she had chosen to leave, because that was the only available story, the only explanation that fit the evidence he had been deliberately given. He had believed it for 15 years. He pressed his fist into the arm of the sofa and breathed. In the Mapogu apartment, 14 floors above a street she had made her own, Nia Bellamy sat at the small kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold. She had been sitting there for 2 hours. She had checked on Mira twice, both times finding her daughter deeply asleep, one arm hanging off the mattress, utterly untroubled by the seismic event her mother was processing alone in the kitchen. Nia looked at the message on her phone. Ryu Jae-hyun, whose family had paid to have her removed from the country while she was 6 months pregnant, whose father had handed her a document and told her to sign it or face alternatives that were not specified but were clearly not gentle, who she had loved in the specific all-or-nothing way of young women who believe that the quality of their love can change the shape of the person they've chosen. Ryu Jae-hyun was asking to meet. She had said yes. She was not sure, sitting in the cold kitchen with her cold tea, whether that was the bravest or the most catastrophically foolish thing she had done since the last time she let herself believe that Ryu Jae-hyun's world had room in it for her. She thought about Mira's face in the atelier, the way her daughter had moved in front of her, quick and sure, no calculation, just action. Mira didn't know what she'd been protecting against. She had no context for the man with the scar, and the controlled stillness, and the eyes she saw every morning in her own mirror. She had stepped forward on pure instinct, and Nia had stood behind her daughter's protection and felt, simultaneously, a pride so sharp it hurt and a grief so old it had worn smooth. She had kept Mira safe by keeping Mira ignorant. She was not sure anymore whether those two things were the same. She put the phone face down on the table. Outside the kitchen window, Seoul pushed its noise and light into the night sky, indifferent and relentless and full of all its ordinary business. Somewhere in Gangnam, in a tower that scraped the underside of the clouds, Ryu Jae-hyun was awake in the dark, holding the knowledge of what his family had done to her, and Nia did not know what to do with the fact that she hoped it was destroying him. She did not know what to do with the fact that she hoped it wasn't. She had loved him. That was the irreducible, stubborn fact she had been living alongside for 15 years. Not around, not past, alongside. She had loved him with the kind of completeness that doesn't resolve cleanly when it ends, that leaves structures behind inside you, load-bearing walls you didn't know were there until you tried to remove them and the ceiling began to come down. She had built a whole life in the space that love had vacated. She had built Mira and her work and this small, warm apartment and the small, warm life. And most days, genuinely, sustainably, most days, it was enough. Today had not been most days. She got up. She poured the cold tea down the drain. She stood at the kitchen sink looking out at the city and made the only decision available to her, which was to proceed with the same carefulness that had kept her and her daughter intact for 15 years. She would meet him, on her terms, in her city, the one she had made for herself. And if Ryu Jae-hyun turned out to be the same man his father had fashioned, cold at the center, capable of using people cleanly and without remorse, she would remove him from their lives with the same efficient finality that his father had once removed her from his. She turned off the kitchen light. She checked on Mira one more time. Still sleeping, still unhurried by the weight of things she didn't know yet, Nia stood in the doorway of her daughter's room and looked at the girl they'd both made. She and Jae-hyun, though his contribution had been purely biological and entirely unknowing, and she felt the full complicated weight of the decision she'd already made. Mira stirred. Her arm came up from the mattress. She made a sound without words. "Go back to sleep," Nia said quietly. Mira went back to sleep. Nia went to her own room. She lay down on her side of the bed. Just her side, the habit of single occupancy long since settled into her bones, and looked at the ceiling. Tomorrow she would text Jae-hyun the address of the cafe 2 blocks from her office. Public, daylight, her territory. She would go alone. She would be careful. She would be, above all things, the woman who had survived his family's cruelty and built something worth protecting. Not the girl who had loved him too much and paid for it. She closed her eyes. Sleep came slowly, and when it came, she did not dream about him, which she decided to count as a victory. In the morning, before she could reconsider, she sent him the address. His reply came in under a minute. Thursday, 10 a.m. "I'll be there." She stared at it. Then, "Don't bring the men." A pause. Longer this time. Then, "Understood." She put the phone away. She made Mira's lunch. She moved through the ordinary architecture of her morning, the lunches, the reminders about homework, the 15-minute argument about whether Mira could wear the hoodie under her uniform jacket, which they both knew she would wear, regardless of the verdict. and she kept her hand steady and her voice level. Mira paused at the apartment door, bag over one shoulder, jacket open over the hoodie, having won the argument through attrition. She looked at her mother. "You okay?" "I'm fine," Nia said. Mira studied her with the particular devastating perceptiveness of teenagers who have grown up in close quarters with only one parent, developing a finely calibrated sensor for when that parent is managing something they're not sharing. "Mom." "Mira, you're doing the thing where your jaw goes like that. Go to school." Mira went, but she paused again in the hallway and looked back once, and Nia met her eyes and held them steady, and whatever Mira found there satisfied her enough to let it go. The door closed. Nia stood in the apartment alone. She thought about those eyes, her daughter's eyes, which were also his eyes, and she thought about what Thursday would require of her, and she pressed both hands flat on the kitchen counter and breathed. Thursday was 2 days away. She had 2 days to decide exactly how much of the truth she was prepared to survive giving him. And Jae-hyun, across the city, was sitting in his office with his father's file open on the desk in front of him, reading the document again, reading the words she will agree she has no other options, and understanding, for the first time with the full weight of it, the exact dimensions of what had been stolen from all three of them. His phone buzzed. He looked down. "Teo, ready for Thursday morning briefing?" Jae-hyun looked at that message for a long moment. He thought about the photographs in the file. Nia, pregnant and alone, being watched from a distance by a man who had been paid to confirm her removal. He thought about Teo's careful, efficient face. He typed back, "Move it to Friday." He put the phone down. He opened his desk drawer and removed a single item, the document from his father's file, the typed 6 paragraphs with the single underlined line, and he set it in the center of his desk and looked at it. He had 2 days. 2 days before he sat across from the woman his father had broken their family to remove, with the knowledge of what had been done and no framework, none at all, for what came next. No leverage, no strategy. Nothing in the extensive operational toolkit of Ryu Jae-hyun, one of the most feared men in Seoul, was of any use here. He was going to a cafe in Mapogu at 10 a.m. on Thursday with nothing but the truth and the ruins of an apology that no combination of words would ever make adequate. He was going anyway. He put the document back in the drawer. He thought about the girl stepping in front of her mother, the set of that jaw, the stillness behind those eyes, his eyes, that was so familiar it made something in his chest move that had not moved in 15 years. Father unknown. He was going to fix that. He did not know how, and he did not know whether Nia would allow it, and he understood with complete clarity that whether she allowed it was entirely her decision and not his. But he was going to try. That much he knew. He closed the drawer. He looked at the city. He began, for the first time in 15 years, to plan towards something other than power. Outside his window, Seoul moved as it always did, forward, indifferent, enormous, filled with people making terrible decisions and necessary ones, with love buried under concrete and ambition, with all the ordinary, unremarkable devastation of lives running alongside each other without touching. Somewhere in Mapogu, a girl was walking to school with her jacket open over her hoodie, already regretting neither argument, and somewhere between them, 15 years of absence was preparing to answer for itself. The cafe meeting hasn't happened yet. Jae-hyun doesn't know that by the time Thursday arrives, someone else already knows about it. Someone who has spent 15 years making sure Ryu Jae-hyun's attention never returned to the woman his family removed. And Kwon Tae-oh, who has kept this secret buried for 15 years, has just received a very troubling piece of information. He is not going to let Thursday happen without consequence. Thursday arrived gray and cold, the kind of Seoul morning that couldn't decide between rain and restraint, the sky sitting low and pale over Mapogu like a held breath. Jae-hyun arrived at the cafe 11 minutes early. He had told himself he wouldn't. He had told himself that arriving early was a form of pressure, that it changed the dynamic of the space before she even walked through the door, that he was trying, genuinely, for possibly the first time in his adult life, to not be the kind of man who arranged rooms around himself before the other person arrived. He had told himself all of this, and then he had told his driver to take the long route, and the long route had still deposited him on the corner of Naya's street with 11 minutes to spare. He stood outside for 4 of them. Then he went in. The cafe was small, warm, the kind of place that had been there long enough to have a personality. Mismatched wooden chairs, a chalkboard menu, the smell of something baking underneath the coffee. 3 other customers. A woman in her 60s reading something on a tablet. 2 university students sharing earphones over a laptop. Nobody who looked like they were watching him, which meant nothing, which he knew. He took the table in the far corner with his back to the wall. He ordered black coffee. He put his phone face down on the table and did not look at it. She walked in at exactly 10. Not 9:59, not 10:02. 10 o'clock precisely, which told him she had also been outside, waiting, letting the clock make the decision about when to enter. He filed that away without meaning to, the reflex of a man who had spent his life reading people and then felt immediately guilty for filing it. She was wearing dark jeans and a burgundy sweater, hair down today, a canvas tote over one shoulder. No coat, which meant she'd walked from close by. She scanned the room before she found him, and the scan was quick and professional. Exits, occupants, threats, which he recognized because it was the same scan he'd done when he walked in. She crossed the room without hesitation and sat down across from him. No hug. No handshake. She set her tote on the floor, folded her hands on the table, and looked at him. Up close, in daylight, she was... He searched for the word and found only true, which was not a useful word but was the only accurate one. She looked true. Like a person who had shed every performance and was simply, entirely herself, in a way that took up exactly as much space as she needed, and not 1 inch more. "You came alone," she said. "You asked me to." "I know what I asked. I'm noting that you did it." He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "Nia, don't start with my name like that." "Like what?" "Like it costs you something to say it." She looked at him steadily. "What do you want, Jae-hyun?" The question landed flat and direct. No anger in it, which was somehow worse than anger. Anger would have been familiar. This measured, dry-eyed directness was what 15 years of survival without him looked like, and it sat across the table from him and waited. "I found my father's files," he said. Something moved behind her eyes, very small. She did not look away. "Teo." He said the name carefully, watching her face. "And my father. The document. The photographs." Silence. The coffee machine behind the counter produced a brief mechanical shriek. Neither of them moved. "How long have you known?" she asked. 4 days. 4 days. She exhaled through her nose, a sound that was not quite a laugh. 15 years and 4 days ago. "I didn't know it existed. The file was sealed. I didn't..." He stopped. He could feel the shape of an excuse forming, and he cut it off before it finished. "I should have looked harder. I should have looked at all." She studied him. "What exactly did the file say?" she asked. He told her. All of it. The photographs, the typed document in his father's voice, the bank transfers to Teo. The underlined line. He told her without softening any of it because she had already lived it, and softening it would be an insult, would be for his comfort rather than hers. When he finished, she was looking at the surface of the table. "They told me you sent them," she said quietly. "Teo and the other one. I don't know his name, I never learned it. They came to the apartment at 6 in the morning. I was alone. They told me you knew, that you decided the marriage was a problem for the family, and you wanted it resolved quietly." She paused. "They had a document with your signature on it." He went very still. "My signature, or a very good copy of it." She looked up. "I was 26 years old and 6 months pregnant, and 2 men I'd seen in your house, at your table, were standing in my doorway at 6 in the morning telling me my husband wanted me gone. I wasn't in a position to authenticate paperwork." He thought about his father's note. She will agree. She has no other options. "Where did they take you?" "A hotel first, 2 days, then a flight to London. I had family there, a cousin. They knew that. They'd done research." She picked up the cup the server had set in front of her without her appearing to order, and he realized she must be a regular, that this was her place, her staff, her neighborhood. "They paid for the flight. They gave me an envelope of cash. They were very polite about all of it." "Professional," he said, and the word tasted like rust. "Very." She set the cup down. "I tried to call you after I landed. The number didn't connect. The apartment number, disconnected. I tried Teo's number, and he picked up and told me that Ryu Jae-hyun had moved on and that contacting him again would be unwise for my health and the health of my family. Jae-hyun looked at his hands. I believe them, she said. Not an accusation, just fact. I believed you sent them because of the signature, because of the way things had been in the weeks before. You'd been distant. You were always distant, but that was a different kind. And because, if I'm being honest with myself, some part of me already knew that what we had was too fragile for the world your father was building around you. It wasn't, he said. It was the only... Don't. He stopped. She leaned forward slightly, both hands flat on the table. I'm not here to hear what it was to you. Not yet. Maybe not at all. I'm here because you found the file and you reached out, and because Mira is going to deserve an explanation someday. And before any of that can happen, I need to understand what you want, specifically, from this conversation, right now. He met her eyes. I want to know if she's mine, he said. The silence stretched. You already know she is, Naya said. I want to hear you say it. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then, yes, she's yours. He breathed. He had known. He had known from the atelier, from that specific geometry of her eyes, from the jawline that his own bathroom mirror had shown him 40 years of mornings. He had known, and it had not mattered until the word yes from Nia's mouth made it real in a new way, in the only way that counted. Does she know anything? He asked. She knows her father and I were together a long time ago, and that it ended before she was born. She's never pushed hard for more. Nia's expression softened fractionally, involuntarily, the way a person's face changes when they're talking about something they love without reservation. She's very practical. She files it under resolved until she has a reason to reopen it. The atelier. She asked me about you that night. Nia looked at him directly. I told her you were someone I loved and someone I survived. She went back to her homework. Someone I survived. He absorbed that. What did she think of that answer? She thought it was incomplete. The ghost of something moved across Nia's face. She always thinks my answers are incomplete. She's right, usually. Jae-hyun looked at this woman across the table. This woman who had taken the full weight of his family's cruelty at 26 years old, alone in a foreign city, pregnant, and had built from that weight not bitterness, but a life, a daughter, a self that was entirely hers. And he felt something that had no clean name, that lived somewhere between devastation and a type of awe he had not previously associated with any emotion he was capable of. I want to meet her, he said, properly. Whenever you decide that's appropriate. On your terms. I'm not coming in here with demands. I know I don't have the standing for demands. No, she said. You don't. But I want to try, if you'll allow it. Whatever that looks like. Whatever pace. Whatever conditions. He paused. I know what I owe the two of you. I can't repay it, but I can try to be something other than another thing that happened to you. She looked at him for a long time. I'll think about it, she said finally. That's all I can give you right now. That's enough. She stood, picked up her tote, and looked down at him. Don't contact Mira directly. Don't show up at her school. Don't send anything to the apartment. If I decide there's a next step, I'll tell you what it is. Understood. She turned to go. Nia? She stopped. The wedding, he said. The bake arrangement. I need you to know that's your business, she said, without turning around. It's not mine. She walked out. He sat in the cafe for another 20 minutes without moving, his coffee gone cold, watching the door she'd gone through, thinking about the word survived and the word try, and the specific quiet way a person's face changes when they talk about their child. He left a tip that was too large. He walked outside into the gray Mapogu morning. His phone had 6 messages. He ignored all of them. He started walking, which was not something he did, and moved through streets he didn't know well, past dry cleaners and convenience stores and a woman hanging laundry from a 3rd-floor window. And he let the city exist around him without processing it, just walked through it, processing other things. He had been walking for 17 minutes when his phone rang. The number was one he recognized but did not expect. Beck Yuna. He stopped on the sidewalk and looked at it for 2 rings, then answered. Chairman Ryu. Her voice was precisely calibrated, composed, formal, with something running under the formality that he clocked immediately as urgency being controlled. "Miss Bake, I need to speak with you, not through the usual channels, privately." He said nothing for a moment, reading the texture of her voice. He had met Una 4 times. The 2 formal family dinners where the parameters of the alliance had been discussed, one meeting with attorneys, one public event where their association had been photographed for the purposes of announcement. She was 28, educated in London and Paris, the only child of Chairman Baek Dae-won, who was powerful in the specific way of men whose power was publicly structured as legitimate business and privately structured as everything else. She was intelligent, and she knew how to perform deference while practicing none of it. "Say it," he said. A pause. "My father knows about the woman and the girl." The sidewalk, the woman's laundry overhead, the specific, immediate stillness of a threat made visible. "How?" "He has people. He has always had people." Another pause. "He found out about the atelier. Someone on staff, I don't know who. He had them in 4 days." Jae-hyun turned and began walking back the direction he'd come. Faster. "What is he planning to do with it?" "He wants to use it, publicly." Her voice was careful, each word measured. "He believes that if the woman's history is made visible in the right way, through the right press contacts, it will embarrass the Ryu name sufficiently that you'll have no leverage to exit the alliance. He wants the illegitimate daughter story in the tabloids before the end of the month. He wants her name, the girl's name, Mira." He thought, Mira, walking to school 4 blocks from her apartment, basketball shoes, hoodie under her jacket, filing things under resolved until she has a reason to reopen them. "Why are you telling me this?" he said. Silence. Then, "Because he also plans to use it against me. If I don't cooperate with the timeline he's set, he'll adjust the story to include my prior knowledge. Make me complicit." Another pause, shorter. "I'm not interested in being my father's instrument, Chairman Ryu. I never have been. This marriage was always his plan, not mine." He processed this quickly. "What do you want in exchange?" "A clean exit. For both of us. From the alliance, from the engagement. Something my father can't reframe as my failure or your betrayal. Something that leaves us both standing." Her voice remained level, but underneath the level he could hear it. The particular tension of a person who has been inside a trap long enough to have mapped all its walls. "I have documentation. Things my father doesn't know I have. His financial arrangements with the press. His arrangements with certain members of the Ryu organization. Zwei am Zeminitan." He stopped walking. "Teo," he said. "Among others." He stood on the sidewalk with cars moving past him and the gray sky pressing down and the full shape of it assembling in his mind. Baek Dae-won and Tae-oh, the old alliance, the old money, the old machinery that had exiled Nia and was now preparing to turn that exile into a weapon. "Send me what you have," he said, "encrypted, the channel my attorney uses. By tonight." A breath. "The girl, she doesn't know?" "No." "Then you have very little time." She paused. "I'm sorry. For my family's involvement in the original, in what happened to the woman and her daughter. I didn't know the full extent until recently. I want that on record, even if only between us." He said nothing for a moment. "Noted," he said finally. The call ended. He stood on the sidewalk in Mapogu and looked at his phone and thought about the chain of events, the atelier, the file, the Thursday cafe, and now this, and understood that what he had believed was a private crisis, a reckoning between himself and Nia and the ruins of 15 years, was not private and had never been going to stay private because nothing in his world stayed private, because he had built his entire life inside a structure where every personal vulnerability was also a strategic liability, and the people around him had always known that and had always been positioned to use it. He called his head of security. "I need a protective watch on an address in Mapogu, discreet, rotating, starting tonight." He gave the address. "The occupants are not to know it's there. No contact, no approach. Observation and intervention only if there's a direct threat." "Understood. Duration?" "Until I say otherwise." He ended the call. He thought about calling Nia. He thought about what she had said. Don't contact Mira. Don't show up at the school. If I decide there's a next step, I'll tell you what it is. He thought about what she would do with the information that Chairman Beck already knew her name and her daughter's name and was preparing to put both in the press. He thought about what she deserved, which was the truth, given to her immediately and without management. He called her. 3 rings. 4. Jae-hyun. Her voice was flat, wary. There's a problem, he said. I need to tell you something. Not over the phone. A pause. How serious? He looked at the gray sky. Serious enough that I'm asking you to see me again today? Another pause. Longer. He could hear her breathing. Not panicked breathing, controlled breathing, the kind that costs something to maintain. Same cafe, she said. 2 hours. She hung up. He put the phone in his pocket and stood there and thought about Teo's calm, precise face across the Thursday morning briefing table, and about his father's document, and about the underlined sentence, and about the way a machinery built over decades continues to operate long after the men who built it believe it's been retired. The machinery was still running. It had been running all along, and it was turning now toward Nia and Mira, and the question of whether Jae-hyun could stop it before it reached them was not a question he was willing to leave. He got to the cafe 40 minutes early this time, and didn't pretend otherwise. He took the same corner table. He ordered nothing. He sat with both hands flat on the surface and watched the door and thought about machinery, the specific patient machinery of men like his father and Baek Dae-won, who built their power not from single decisions but from systems, from the slow accumulation of leverage and dependency in sealed files, from the understanding that a man could be controlled most efficiently, not through direct threat, but through the people he loved. They had always known about Nia. That was what he kept returning to, sitting in the warm cafe with the chalkboard menu and the mismatched chairs. They had always known. Baek Dae-won's move was not a discovery. It was a deployment. The information had been sitting in reserve for the right moment, and the right moment was now, when Jae-hyun had made the mistake of being seen in the same room as her, when the atelier staff had reported back to whoever they reported back to, when the sealed architecture of his family's oldest crime had suddenly, irreversibly acquired daylight. He was sitting there thinking this when his phone buzzed. Not Nia, his head of security. He answered. We have a problem at the Mapo address. He was standing before the sentence finished. What kind? A vehicle. Black sedan, no plates, been sitting on the opposite block for 40 minutes. Our people spotted it on the second rotation. It's not ours, and it's not police. Occupants. 2, possibly 3. We can't confirm without closer approach, and you said no contact. He was already moving toward the door. Pull back 1 block. Don't spook them. Is she inside? The woman arrived home approximately 20 minutes ago. The girl is still at school. Doesn't finish until 3:40. 3:40. He checked the time. 2 hours and 12 minutes. Keep eyes on both. I want to know the second that car moves. He stepped outside. The gray morning had turned grayer, the air carrying the particular damp weight of rain that had decided to arrive. He stood on the sidewalk and thought fast and clean, the way he thought when the variables were moving and the margin was narrow. Not emotionally, not yet, later for that. Nia walked around the corner. She was moving at a normal pace, canvas tote, no coat again, and she saw him outside the cafe and read his face in approximately 1 second. She stopped. What happened? She said. Not a question. There's a vehicle outside your building. No plates. Vex people, most likely. He watched her absorb this, watched her jaw set and her shoulders adjust. Not with fear, with the particular infuriating composure of a woman who had been managing threats alone for 15 years and had developed for it a kind of muscle memory. Mira's still at school. I know when she finishes. We need to move. Both of you, somewhere else, tonight at minimum. She looked at him, direct. We. Naya, you said we. You don't get to say we yet. She stepped closer, lowering her voice, and even in the middle of a threat assessment, her face was entirely, terribly clear. I need you to understand something. You showing up in my life 4 days ago does not give you operational authority over it. I don't care what your security apparatus looks like. This is my daughter. I know it is. Then advise. Don't command. He held her gaze. He was not accustomed to being corrected. He was also, at this particular moment, not in a position to be anything other than what she needed him to be.
"There is a black sedan outside your building," he said carefully. 2 to 3 occupants. They arrived after you did, which means they followed you from here or they know your address already. Given what Yuna told me, Baek Dae-won has your name and your daughter's name and is planning a press release. This vehicle is either surveillance or the beginning of something else. He paused. My advice is that you don't go back to the apartment until we know which. She was quiet for a moment.
And Mira? My people can pick her up from school, discreetly. A car she wouldn't recognize as connected to anything. No. Flat and immediate. I pick her up. Myself. Nia, if they're watching the school, I said I pick her up. She met his eyes and held them. And what was in hers was not stubbornness and not recklessness. It was the bright, absolute certainty of a woman who knew precisely where the line was and had drawn it in stone. You want to help? Fine. Have your car behind mine. Have your people on the block. But I am the one who walks up to my daughter at 3:40, and I am the one she sees, not a stranger in a black car. He said nothing for a moment. All right, he said. They went inside. They sat. She ordered tea and he ordered coffee, and for 40 minutes they worked through it with the focused, uncomfortable efficiency of two people who did not fully trust each other managing a shared problem. His security contacts, her knowledge of the routes, the school's layout, the places Mira might be pulled if she were outside the gate. She knew the school better than he would have expected, knew the blind corners, knew where the monitoring cameras did and didn't reach. And he watched her talk through it and thought, 15 years. She's been doing this alone for 15 years. At 2:15, his phone buzzed again. The black sedan had moved. He looked at the message and felt the specific cold clarity of a threat becoming concrete. They're mobile, he said. She looked at him across the table. How long until school ends? An hour and 25 minutes. She stood up and picked up her tote. Then we leave now. They went. His car fell in behind hers. A nondescript silver vehicle she'd arrived in, the kind that disappeared in Seoul traffic. And he sat in the back of the G-Wagon with his phone in his hand and tracked his security team's updates as they moved through the city. The black sedan had gone north, toward the school district, not toward the apartment, toward Mira. He called his team lead. I need 4 people at Mira's school, plain clothes, now. Already moving. He looked out the window at the city passing. The ordinary afternoon city, the streets full of people going about the business of their lives, entirely unaware that somewhere in the gray October traffic, a machinery built by old men with sealed files was turning toward a 14-year-old girl who didn't know her last name was wrong. Nia's silver car moved through traffic 2 lengths ahead of him, steady, no hesitation. He thought about what Yuna had said, things my father doesn't know I have. He thought about the encrypted files she'd promised by tonight, and about Teo, and about the shape of the thing he was beginning to understand. Not just his father's original crime, but the ongoing architecture that had been built around it, the continuing arrangement between the Baek family and the elements of his own organization that had never been loyal to him at all. His phone rang. Teo. He stared at it. He let it ring through. He watched the call end, and then he called Yuna. She picked up on the second ring. The files, he said. How quickly can you move them? I told you, tonight. I need them now. Whatever you have right now, send it. A pause. What's happening? Send it. She sent it. He spent the remaining 40 minutes of the drive going through everything on his phone. Yuna's documentation, assembled with the careful, meticulous patience of a woman who had been preparing an exit for longer than he'd realized. Bank records, communications, a series of meeting logs that charted in dry, transactional language, the relationship between Baek Dae-won and Kwon Tae-oh going back not 3 years, not 5 years, but 14. 14 years. 1 year after Nia's removal. He read the earliest entry twice, a meeting at a private club in Gangnam. The purpose listed as alignment of organizational interests, succession. The parties, Baek Dae-won and Kwon Tae-oh, with 3 others named in abbreviated form, succession. He thought about his father's death 3 years ago. He thought about the illness, sudden, aggressive, the kind that moved fast enough that there had been no time for the questions a more suspicious son might have asked. He thought about Tae-oh at the funeral.
standing at his shoulder, steady and precise, and full of the composed grief of a man who had served the family for decades. He thought about the sealed cabinet, the file, the document. His father had used Teo to remove Nia, but Teo had then, 1 year later, made an independent arrangement with the Beck family. The loyalty had been for sale the entire time. His hands were not shaking. He was surprised by this. He looked at them, flat on his knees in the back seat, and they were perfectly still, and he thought, I am either beyond the point where my body responds normally to things, or I have simply arrived at a place where the ground has been gone for so long that falling no longer feels like falling. The car stopped. He looked up. They were 1 block from the school. His driver was looking in the rear view. She's already there, the driver said. Through the window, he could see Nia's silver car parked at the curb, and Nia standing beside it, hands in her pockets, watching the school gate. His security people were in position. He could identify 2 of them without trying, which meant they were slightly less discreet than he'd ordered, but they were there. The school gate opened. Children came out in the unruly cellular way of adolescence released, in clusters, breaking apart, reforming, the noise of it audible even through the car's glass. He scanned automatically. Mira came through the gate 4 minutes after it opened. She was taller than he'd registered in the atelier. She was wearing the uniform with the hoodie underneath, bag over one shoulder, moving with the long strided looseness of someone who was used to being the fastest person in a space and knew it. She was talking to another girl, gesturing at something, and then she looked up and saw Naya, and the gesture stopped mid-motion. She crossed to her mother quickly. They exchanged something, a few words. Nia's hand briefly on the side of Mira's face, Mira's expression shifting from surprised to alert to the particular focused stillness of a teenager who has just been told that normal has been suspended. They got in the car. The silver car pulled out. He told his driver to follow. The black sedan did not appear. His team reported it had stopped 3 blocks from the school and had not approached. Surveillance only, for now. He relayed the instruction to maintain distance and keep tracking. They drove for 20 minutes to a hotel in Yongsan that Jae-hyun kept a permanent suite in under a corporate name. Not associated with Ryu directly, clean, one of 4 such arrangements he maintained for exactly these circumstances. The circumstances being when the version of his life that was supposed to be contained had become dangerously uncontained. Nia met him in the lobby. Mira was beside her, backpack still on, arms crossed in the specific architecture of a teenager who has been told some things and not others and is conducting a silent assessment of the situation. She looked at Jae-hyun with those eyes, his eyes, and said nothing. He said nothing either. He looked at Naya. The suite is on 17, he said. 2 bedrooms. My people have the floor. Nia nodded. She put her hand briefly on Mira's shoulder and steered her toward the elevator. Mira went, but she looked back at him once. Not hostilely, evaluatingly. The look of a person filing new data. He watched them go. Then he went to the business center off the lobby, which was empty at this hour, and he closed the door and stood in the fluorescent quiet and allowed himself 60 seconds to feel the full, unmanaged weight of what he now knew. Teo had not simply carried out a 28-year-old order. Teo had built a parallel structure around that original crime, had used it as foundation material, as leverage over the Becks, and through the Becks, over the evolving machinery of Jae-hyun's own organization. The man Jae-hyun had promoted, trusted, consulted, brought into every significant decision of the last 15 years, had been operating inside a separate allegiance the entire time. And his father's death, he stopped that thought. He was not ready for it. He put it away in the same sealed place he'd been putting things all day, things too large for the current moment, and he breathed through the pressure of it, 60 seconds. Then he called his attorney. I need you to prepare 3 things, he said, tonight. He laid it out. The dissolution of the Beck-Ryu engagement, the legal documentation for immediate asset protection for 2 individuals he would name, and a separate document establishing the process for formal paternity recognition. His attorney was quiet for a moment. Paternity recognition, the attorney repeated. You heard me. The child is mine. Yes. He looked at the wall. Tonight, all 3.
I'll be in touch with the encrypted files Bake Yuna sent. He ended the call. He went upstairs. He knocked on the suite door. Nia opened it. She had taken her coat off. Mira was visible through the interior doorway, sitting on the bed in the larger room, shoes off, doing something on her phone with the absorbed focus of someone determined to perform normalcy in an abnormal situation. "Can I come in?" he said. Nia studied him. "What happened?" "There's more. I need to tell you all of it." She stepped back. He came in. He sat in one of the chairs at the small table by the window. Nia sat across from him. She didn't call Mira in, and he didn't ask her to. He told her about the 14 years of documentation, about Tayo and the Bayeks, about the meeting logs, about the thing he had not yet said aloud to anyone, which was the shadow it cast over his father's death, the question that lived there, enormous and unanswered. Nia listened. She did not interrupt. Her face was controlled throughout, but he watched the small tells, tot, the way her breath shifted at the Teo duration, the way her hands moved once and then stilled when he got to the implied question about his father. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then, "You think Teo—" "I don't know. I'm not prepared to say it yet. But the timeline is—" "Yes." She exhaled. "Yes, the timeline is—" Silence.
"He's going to move," Jaehyun said. "Now that I've found the file, now that the Bakes know I know, Teo can't let this proceed. He can't let me complete a paternity recognition. He can't let Mira become a documented heir. That changes everything he's built." "Because it legitimizes her," Nia said. "Because it legitimizes her, and it shows the Ryu organization that the last 15 years of my father's decisions, and by extension Teo's position, were built on a fabrication." She looked at her hands. "What are you going to do?" she asked. He thought about the question. He had been building toward an answer all day, through the cafe and the files and the drive to the school and the 60 seconds in the business center, assembling it piece by piece from the rubble of every assumption he'd held about his own life. "I'm going to burn it down," he said. "All of it. The Beak Alliance, Teo's position, the arrangement my father made. I'm going to do it publicly, in front of the organization, in a way that can't be walked back or reframed." He paused. "But I can't do it before he moves. And he's going to move fast because he has to." From the other room came the sound of Mira shifting on the bed, the soft thump of a phone being set down. Then her voice, even and direct, carrying through the open doorway without any particular attempt at discretion. "I can hear you, you know." Nia closed her eyes briefly. Jaehyun looked at the doorway. Mira appeared in it a moment later, sock feet on the carpet, arms crossed, backpack abandoned but posture unchanged. That specific load-bearing stillness. She looked at her mother first, then at Jaehyun, and her expression was not frightened, and it was not angry. It was the expression of someone who had been filing things under resolve for 14 years and had just been given the key to the cabinet. "Who are you?" she said. Not to Nia. To him. The question landed in the room and sat there. He looked at Nia. Nia looked back at him, and in her eyes was something that was not permission and not refusal. It was the particular devastating neutrality of a woman placing a decision exactly where it belonged, which was not with her. He looked back at Mira. He thought about the document. Father unknown. He thought about the girl stepping in front of her mother in the atelier, automatic and sure, without a single calculation. He thought about 15 years of father unknown and everything that phrase had built in its absence. The discipline, the basketball, the incomplete answers, the jaw set exactly like his in the morning mirror. He thought about the kind of man who answers a question like this by, he said, "My name is Ryu Jae-hyun. I'm your father." The words came out flat and undecorated, the way he said everything that mattered. Not because he lacked feeling, but because feeling, in this family, had always lived underneath the words rather than in them. He watched Mira's face. He watched her receive it. She didn't move. Her arms stayed crossed. Her expression did the thing he'd seen it do in the atelier. That quick, contained processing, the filing and cross-referencing of new data against existing files. Then she looked at Nia. Nia met her daughter's eyes and did not look away, and did not offer anything except presence. Steady, there, the unbroken fact of herself. Mira looked back at Jae-hyun. "Okay," she said. Not okay like she was fine with it.
Okay, like she had received the information and was placing it somewhere and was not going to perform a reaction for anyone's benefit. She uncrossed her arms, turned, and went back into the bedroom, and a moment later they heard the soft sound of her lying down on the bed. Nia let out a breath so slow and controlled it was almost not audible. Jaehyun looked at the doorway where Mira had been standing. That's how she does it, Nia said quietly. She processes alone. Don't chase her in there. I wasn't going to. Good. She looked at him. You told her the truth. You told me to, in the atelier, with your eyes. He paused. I listened. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to the window and stood there with her arms wrapped around herself, looking out at the Yongsan night. Neither of them said anything for a while. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. His team lead, the black sedan, is back, parked outside the hotel. He stood. They found him anyway. How they'd found him. Which car? Which route? Which of his own people had fed the information? Was a question for later. Right now it was simply a fact. They were here, which meant the window for controlled action had just closed. He typed back, how many vehicles total? Vehicles. The response came in under 10 seconds. 3, 1 front, 1 rear, 1 on the cross street. Minimum 6 occupants confirmed. Not surveillance, not intimidation, containment. He put the phone in his pocket and looked at Nia's back. We need to move, he said. Now. She turned. She read his face. She didn't ask questions. She went directly to the bedroom doorway. Mira, shoes on, we're leaving. From inside, where? Shoes first. The sounds of movement. Jaehyun was already at the room's safe, removing the secondary phone and the cash he kept there, pulling on his jacket. He called his attorney. The documents. Filed 20 minutes ago. Electronic record is time-stamped. Good. He paused. If I don't contact you by morning, activate everything. Silence on the line, then. Understood. He ended the call. Mira came out of the bedroom with her shoes on and her backpack on her back, expression composed and watchful. She looked at her mother, at Jaehyun, at the deliberate speed with which both adults were moving. How serious, she said. Jaehyun looked at her. Serious, he said. She nodded once. No performance. She was ready. They moved. The hotel had 3 exits beyond the lobby. A service corridor that ran to a loading bay on the cross street, a parking structure connected by a second-floor walkway, and a staff entrance off the kitchen that opened onto a narrow service alley. Jaehyun knew all 3 from the years of using this building as a safe address. The cross street was covered. The parking structure would be the second place anyone positioned properly would watch. He called his team lead as they moved through the service corridor, the air changing from hotel warm to the cold industrial smell of a working building's back infrastructure, some pipes, rubber, the distant sound of kitchen equipment. I need the alley clear. 2 minutes. I don't have 2 minutes. 90 seconds. He kept moving. Behind him, Nia moved quietly and quickly, one hand not touching Mira's back, but hovering near it. Not grabbing, not gripping, just there. Mira kept pace without instruction, her long stride eating the corridor in the same efficient way she probably covered a basketball court. They reached the kitchen staff entrance, a steel door with a push bar. He looked at his phone. His team lead. Alley clear. Vehicle at the far end, passenger side door open. He pushed the bar. Cold air and rain hit them. The rain had finally decided, coming down in the thin, persistent way of Seoul autumn, the kind that was more wet than heavy. The alley was narrow and smelled of kitchen waste and city drainage, and the particular anonymous smell of Seoul's back corridors, the unglamorous infrastructure of the city going about its functional business. The vehicle was there, a gray van, nothing on it, a man he recognized behind the wheel. They moved toward it, 20 meters, 15. Mira was between him and Nia, not complaining about the rain, not asking questions, moving. 10 meters. The alley entrance on the near end filled with a figure. Not running. Walking. The deliberate, unhurried walk of a man who knows the geometry of the situation and is comfortable in it. Kwantai O. He was wearing a dark coat, collar up against the rain, both hands visible and empty. A deliberate display. The body language of someone communicating that the current confrontation was not about immediate violence, but about something worse. about the kind of power that doesn't need to raise its hands to make its point. He stopped 10 feet away. He looked past Jae-hyun at Nia, then at Mira, then at Jae-hyun. Chairman Tum, he said. The word was a performance. 53 years of precision. Jae-hyun stopped moving. Behind him, he heard Nia's steps slow and stop, and then her hand was on Mira's arm, firm and still. Tae-oh, Jae-hyun said. Rain. The van idling at the far end, the thin, persistent sound of water on concrete and metal. You should have called me, Tae-oh said. When you found the file, I would have explained. Explained what? Context. He tilted his head slightly. Your father made decisions under circumstances you don't fully understand. The woman was a liability. Not personally, structurally. The Beck Alliance required my wife, Jae-hyun said. Call her what she is. Tae-oh looked at him. Something shifted in his expression. Not guilt, nothing so human as guilt, but a recalibration. He had miscalculated the temperature of this. Your wife, he said, who you had been married to for 3 years with no family approval, no structural purpose, my pregnant wife. Jae-hyun took one step forward. Who you drove to a hotel and handed a document with my forged signature and told her I wanted her gone. Who you put on a plane alone 6 months pregnant with a cash envelope and a threat. Tae-oh's expression remained level. It was handled cleanly. You said those exact words to me once, about a different situation. I thought I understood what they meant. He was close enough now to see the rain on Tae-oh's coat, the precise dampness of it, the particular stillness of the man's hands. My daughter is 15 meters behind me. Tae-oh glanced past him at Mira. Jae-hyun watched where the man's eyes went and felt something cold and absolute settle into the center of his chest. The specific, structural coldness of a decision being made. She can't be recognized, Tae-oh said. You understand that. The documentation you filed tonight, my attorney called. It cannot stand. It destabilizes the organization. It opens the question of your father's estate. I know what it does. Then you understand why I'm here. I understand exactly why you're here. Jae-hyun looked at him. Walk me through the rest. My father's death. Tell me I'm wrong. Silence. Rain. Tae-oh looked at him for a long moment, and what lived in that look was neither confirmation nor denial. It was the look of a man deciding how much truth the current situation required. The look of someone calculating whether the truth, at this stage, was a weapon or a liability. Your father was dying anyway, he said finally. The alley went very quiet inside Jae-hyun's head. The timeline was, don't. His voice came out different, flat in a way that was not control but its opposite. The sound of something under too much pressure going perfectly, completely still. Don't tell me the timeline. Tae-oh looked at him steadily. You would have found out about the woman eventually, Tae-oh said. The girl. Your father understood that. He wanted the transition complete before that became a complication. He paused. I carried out his wishes. He didn't die of natural causes. Tae-oh said nothing. Which was the answer? Jae-hyun stood in the rain in the service alley behind the Yongsan Hotel with that answer and did not move and did not speak for a moment that had no particular duration. Behind him, he heard Mira say, very quietly, to her mother, Mom. And Naya's voice, barely audible, I know, stay still. He looked at Tae-oh. The men on the street, he said. The vehicles. They're yours or BX? Both, Tae-oh said simply. The arrangement is comprehensive at this point. How many of mine are part of it? Tae-oh considered this. Enough, he said. Jae-hyun's jaw was tight. He could feel his pulse in his neck, in his hands. Not the adrenaline pulse of physical readiness, but something slower and more fundamental. The deep physiological acknowledgement of a moment that everything prior has been building toward. He looked at the man who had stood at his shoulder for 15 years, who had sat across his desk every Thursday, who had held an umbrella at his father's funeral. How many people are in those vehicles? He said. Enough, Tae-oh said again. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Walk the woman and the girl back inside. The documentation gets withdrawn, the paternity filing gets dissolved, and this becomes a private family matter that gets handled privately. He paused. No one gets hurt. No one gets hurt, Jae-hyun repeated. Not if you're reasonable. He looked at Tae-oh. He thought about his father's sealed file, the underlined sentence, the bank transfers. He thought about Naya, at 26 years old, at 6 in the morning, with a forged document and 2 men in her doorway. He thought about Mira on a birth certificate under Father Unknown. He thought about 14 years of logs and a private club in Gangnam and the word succession. He thought about the van at the far end of the alley, the engine still running, his team lead somewhere on the other end of a phone, the 6 occupants in 3 vehicles, and Tae-oh standing in the rain with his hands empty and patient and his eyes doing the calculation of a man who has been doing calculations for 28 years and is very confident in his arithmetic. Move aside, Jae-hyun said. Tae-oh blinked, once. Jae-hyun, move aside. I have 6 men. I have a recording. Jae-hyun reached into his jacket and held up his phone, the screen lit, the timestamp running. This conversation. From the moment you walked into the alley, your voice, your words, your explicit acknowledgement. He paused. Say his name again. Say my father's name and what you did. Tae-oh's expression changed. For the first time in 28 years of knowing this man, Jae-hyun watched something move across Kwon Tae-oh's face that was neither precision nor control. It was the specific, involuntary expression of a man who has made an error. That's not admissible. In what court? Jae-hyun said. I'm not talking about court. I'm talking about my organization. The men in those vehicles, half of them grew up in the Ryu structure. They knew my father. They knew him before you arranged the timeline. He kept his eyes on Tae-oh's face. Play this for them. What do you think they do? Silence. Rain. Tae-oh looked at him. Something was shifting in the geometry of the alley. Not physically, not yet, but in the invisible architecture of the situation, the way a room's atmosphere changes in the seconds before something breaks. Then, from the street end of the alley, not Tae-oh's end, the far end, beyond the van, came a sound. Footsteps. Multiple. Moving fast. Tae-oh's gaze moved fractionally to the right. Jae-hyun turned his head. His team lead and 2 others were coming up the alley from the street end, moving in the quick, purposeful way of people arriving rather than positioning. Tae-oh took 1 step back. Don't, Jae-hyun said. Tae-oh stopped. The rain came down. The van idled. The 3 men from Jae-hyun's team reached them and fanned out and held positions without touching anyone, reading the room with the professional efficiency of people who had been doing this for a long time and knew exactly what holding a position looked like. Jae-hyun looked at Tae-oh across the narrowing distance. Your vehicles are going to leave, he said. Right now. You're going to call them off, all 3. And they're going to leave this block and you're going to step to the side of this alley and watch me put my daughter in that van. He held the phone steady. Or I play this recording right now out loud for every person standing within earshot, and you can explain to the 6 men in those vehicles what the timeline was. Tae-oh's jaw was tight. His hands, still empty, still visible, were very still in the rain. This isn't over, he said. I know, Jae-hyun said. I'm not asking for over. I'm asking for tonight. A long moment. The rain. The idling engine. The specific pressure of a man measuring his options with the speed and precision of a lifetime's practice. Tae-oh reached into his coat. Every person in the alley moved. His team lead's hand went to his side. Jae-hyun shifted his weight forward. The air pressure changed in the specific, dangerous way it changes when a group of trained people all react to the same ambiguous motion at the same time. Tae-oh brought out a phone. He made a call. 2 words in a voice too low to hear over the rain. From the street, through the alley walls, came the sound of vehicle engines turning over, then retreating. The alley did not relax exactly. It decompressed, very slightly. Tae-oh put his phone back in his coat. He looked at Jae-hyun with the precise, calibrated expression of a man filing a loss as temporary. Thursday, he said. Usual time. No, Jae-hyun said. Not Thursday. Not ever again. He stepped to the side and gestured toward the van. Get out of this alley. Teo looked at him. He looked at the team lead. He looked, once more and very briefly, in the direction of Nia and Mira behind Jae-hyun. Then he walked past. His shoulder came within 8 inches of Jae-hyun's as he passed. Neither man touched the other. He walked to the street end of the alley and around the corner and was gone. Jae-hyun stood still for 3 seconds. Then he turned around. Nia was looking at him. Her expression was controlled and waterlogged. She was soaked, they all were. The thin rain had had its way with all of them in the time they'd been standing in it, and the controlled expression had cracks in it that the rain made visible, the way water finds every unsealed surface. Mira was beside her. Mira was looking at him with those eyes. She had heard all of it. She had heard Teo say enough, and she had heard Jae-hyun say my daughter, and she had heard the word timeline, and she was 15 years old, and she was not crying, and she was not performing, and she was simply looking at him with the whole enormous weight of everything she now understood she had been standing outside of for her entire life. Okay, she said again, the same word as before. Different now. He looked at her. He looked at his daughter, soaking wet in a service alley in Yongsan, backpack on, shoes on, jaw set. He said, "Let's get you out of the rain." She nodded. They moved to the van. His team lead held the side door. Naya got in first, then Mira. Jae-hyun stood in the rain with his hand on the doorframe and looked at the empty end of the alley where Teo had been standing. The recording was on his phone. The paternity filing was time-stamped and filed. Yuna's documentation was encrypted and waiting. Teo had 28 years of knowledge of the Ryu organization's structure, its finances, its personnel, its vulnerabilities. He had the Baek Alliance and whatever else 14 years of logs had built. He had the specific patient danger of a man who has been planning for contingencies longer than his opponent has been paying attention. And he had told Jae-hyun it wasn't over. Jae-hyun got in the van and closed the door. The van moved through the Seoul night, rain on the windows, the city producing its relentless ordinary light and noise on all sides. And in the back, Mira sat between her mother and the man who had just said her name out loud for the first time, and no one spoke. And the silence was not empty. It was full of the full, complicated, unresolved weight of everything that was still coming, everything that Teo's retreat had only... The van drove for 40 minutes before Jae-hyun told the driver to stop. Not at a destination, not at another safe house or corporate address. He told the driver to pull into the parking structure of a large commercial building in Mapo. Anonymous, open 24 hours, the kind of structure that exists in every major city as pure infrastructure, as space between spaces. And stop on the 3rd level, away from other vehicles, under the fluorescent wash of lights that made everyone look like they were being processed. He needed to think without moving. The driver stopped the engine. The rain on the structure's open sides continued, channeled now into the architectural gutters, running in thin streams down the concrete pillars. Mira had fallen asleep 20 minutes into the drive, not the sleep of someone at peace, but the sudden, total unconsciousness of a body that had exceeded its limit and simply shut down, her head against the window, her breath slow and deep. Nia sat beside her with one hand resting near her daughter's arm, not touching, just available. Jae-hyun sat in the front passenger seat and looked at the concrete wall ahead of him and thought. Teo had walked away. That was the problem. Teo walking away was not resolution. It was repositioning. A man who had operated at that level of patience and structural depth for 28 years did not accept a loss in an alley and retire. He had called off the vehicles because the recording had changed the calculus, because confrontation in that moment carried too much risk of exposure. But the recording was only as powerful as the people who heard it, and Teo had 14 years of logs to work with, and the Baek Alliance, and whatever portion of Jae-hyun's own organization remained aligned with the old structure. The window was narrow. He called his attorney at 11:41 at night. "The filing," he said. "Is it airtight?" "As filed, yes. The challenge would have to come from a competing claim or a procedural error, and there's no competing claim available, and I don't make procedural errors. Teo will try to introduce documentation disputing paternity. Let him. You have the original filing, the timestamp, and, I assume, the ability to establish biological confirmation if it comes to that. It won't come to that. I need it not to come to that." He looked at the rain running down the concrete pillar. Yuna's documentation. The Baek Teo meeting logs. If those go to the organization's senior members before Teo can frame them, before he can present his version of what happened in that alley tonight, it changes everything. How many senior members can you reach directly? Tonight. He thought about it. Of the 12 senior figures in the Ryu organization's structure, 4 were Teo's, in the sense that their loyalty had been cultivated and maintained by him over years. 3 were genuinely Jae-hyun's, men who had come up under him, whose advancement had been his decision, who owed nothing to the prior arrangement. The remaining 5 were institutional, loyal to the organization itself, to the Ryu name, to the structure that fed their families and structured their lives, and those 5 would go to whoever presented the most convincing case for what the Ryu organization was and who was running it. 5 men, tonight. Get me Park Sung-won first, he said. Park Sung-won was 61 and had been in the Ryu organization for 33 years. He had worked under Jae-hyun's grandfather before his father, before Jae-hyun himself. He was not sentimental. He was the least sentimental man Jae-hyun knew, outside of his own mirror. But he was, in the specific way of men who had served a structure long enough to become part of its foundation, genuinely loyal to the idea of the thing rather than to any individual within it. He would care about what had been done to the succession. He would care about Teo's arrangement with the Becks. He would care about the word that Jae-hyun had not yet said out loud to anyone, but that the recording in his phone said clearly, in Teo's own voice, through implication and careful non-denial. His father's death had not been natural. He would care about that most of all. His attorney reached Park Sung-won in 20 minutes. Jae-hyun moved to the back of the parking structure, away from the van, and talked for 38 minutes. He told Park everything. The file, the photographs, Nia's removal, the 14 years of logs, the alley. He played 30 seconds of the recording. He heard Park breathe on the other end of the line with the specific heavy quality of a man revising an enormous amount of prior belief. When he finished, Park was quiet for a moment. "Your father?" Park said. "Yes." Another silence. "I'll make the calls," Park said finally. "Give me until 4 in the morning." It was 11:58. He went back to the van. Nia was awake, looking at him through the window. He opened the door and sat in the seat behind the driver. "How long?" she said. "A few hours." She nodded. She looked at Mira, still sleeping, and then back at him. "The recording," she said. "Will it hold?" "It doesn't need to hold legally. It needs to hold organizationally. It needs to be enough for the right people to make the right decision before Teo can move." She processed this. "And if they don't?" He looked at her. "They will." "You don't know that." "No," he said. "But Park Sung-won has been loyal to the Ryu name for 33 years, and the recording says what it says." He paused. "It'll hold." Nia looked at him for a long moment, not with trust exactly, but with the specific, careful attention of a person assessing the reliability of a variable they can't control. "I want to go home," she said quietly. "I want to take Mira home and put her in her own bed. That's what I want." "I know." "Tell me when it's safe to do that." "I will." She looked out the window at the rain and the concrete and the fluorescent light. She heard everything, Nia said. In the alley. She's 15. She heard a man confirm that her grandfather, that someone arranged. She stopped. Her voice had remained level throughout, but it stopped there, at the shape of what Mira had absorbed. "I know," he said again. It was all he had. She's going to have questions. She's going to come to me at 2 in the morning for weeks with questions, and I'm going to have to answer them. And some of the answers are, she pressed her lips together. Some of the answers are ugly. I'll answer them too, he said. If she wants that, if you allow it. Nia looked at him. She's going to be angry, she said. Not tonight. She's in shock tonight. But she's going to be angry at me for keeping it from her, at you for being absent, at all of it. And it's going to be specific, and it's going to be fair, and you can't manage it or fix it. You can only sit in it. I know. Do you? Not an accusation, a genuine question. He thought about the word yes and the ways it could be inadequate and the ways it could be true simultaneously. I'm learning, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned back to the window. At 3:47 in the morning, Park Sung-won called back. 7 of the 12 senior members were aligned. Four of Teo's men had, upon hearing the recording and the meeting logs presented by Park, declined to take any further action on Teo's behalf. One had gone silent, which Park assessed as functional abstention. The four who remained openly aligned with Teo were, Park noted with the dry precision of a man who had been in this structure for 3 decades, no longer in a position to act on that alignment in any meaningful way. Teo's operational capacity within the Ryu organization was, as of approximately 3:30 in the morning, effectively gone. Jae-hyun listened to this. He said, "Where is he?" "His apartment as of an hour ago. My people are watching." "Keep them there. I need to speak with him in the morning, directly." "That's inadvisable." "I know. Keep them there." He ended the call. He told his driver to take Nia and Mira home. The Mapogu apartment building at 4 in the morning was exactly what it was. Quiet, ordinary, the lobby's single security desk occupied by a man who looked up with tired professional attention as they came in. Nia carried Mira, who was half awake and heavy with it, her head on her mother's shoulder, and Nia carried her with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing it for 15 years, even though Mira was nearly as tall as she was, and it required effort. Jae-hyun held the elevator. He stood in the hallway outside their apartment door while Nia got Mira inside and into bed. He stood there and looked at the hallway's generic carpet and the scuff mark on the baseboards from years of lived-in traffic and thought about the specific, unperformable nature of what was required of him now. He could not fix 15 years. He could not restore what had been taken. He could not give Mira back the knowledge of who she was that she had deserved from the beginning. He could not give Nia back her 20s, her pregnancy, the years of building a life alone in a foreign country, the 6 in the morning, and the forged signature and the cash envelope. He could not do any of it. He could only be, from here, something other than the shape of an absence. Nia came back to the door. She looked at him in the hallway. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "Go deal with the rest of it," she said finally. "Deal with Teo. Deal with whatever needs to be dealt with. And then," she paused, "come back to this door, and we'll figure out what comes after." He looked at her. "You'll let me," he said, not assuming, asking. "I'm considering it." The ghost of something moved across her face, not a smile, but the possibility of one, held in reserve. "Don't waste the consideration." He didn't touch her. He nodded once and turned and went back to the elevator. He met Tae-oh at 8 in the morning at the Ryu building. Not the penthouse, the third-floor conference room, neutral ground inside Jae-hyun's structure, with Park Sung-won present and 2 others, and no pretense about what the meeting was. Tae-oh came. He was precise and composed and dressed as he always dressed, and he sat across the table from Jae-hyun with the expression of a man who had spent the night recalculating and had arrived at a number he didn't like but could accept. Jae-hyun put the recording on the table between them, the phone screen up, the timestamp visible. "You're going to resign," Jae-hyun said. "Every position, every title, every formal and informal role in this organization. Today in writing, with your signature, your actual signature on the document." Tae-oh looked at the phone. "And if I don't?" The recording goes to every senior member simultaneously, with the meeting logs, with the timeline of my father's illness, with everything Baek Yuna provided. He paused. "I think you know what that produces." Silence. The conference room's air conditioning ran its low mechanical note. "You can't prove the illness," Tae-oh said. "I don't need to prove it. I need to introduce the question. In this organization, in this structure, a question like that has its own velocity." He looked at Tae-oh. "You know that better than anyone." Tae-oh was quiet for a long time. He looked at the phone. He looked at Park Sung-won. He looked at the wall. Then he looked at Jae-hyun. "Your father believed he was protecting you," he said. "The woman, the girl. He believed it was a liability you couldn't see clearly because you were—" "Don't," Jae-hyun said. "He was trying—" "I know what he was trying." His voice remained level with effort. "I know exactly what he believed he was doing. And I know what he actually did. And I know what you did with the space his decisions created." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not interested in his intentions. I'm interested in your signature. Today." Tae-oh looked at him. Something in the man's face settled. Not defeat. Kwon Tae-oh was not built for the performance of defeat, but a recognition. The specific recognition of a man who has assessed the room fully and accurately and understands that the thing he has lost was lost before he sat down. One condition, Teo said. You're not positioned to have conditions. One. His voice was even. The organization doesn't move against me directly. I walk away. No retaliation from the structure. He paused. I'm 60 years old. I'm tired. I want to be tired in peace. Jae-hyun looked at him. He looked at this man who had sat at his shoulder for 15 years, who had been with him at his father's funeral, who had told Nia at 6 a.m. that the man she loved wanted her gone. He looked at this man who had, in the cold transactional architecture of his own logic, believed he was maintaining a structure worth maintaining and had done monstrous things in service of that belief. Walk away, Jae-hyun said, and stay walked. Teo signed the documents at 9:15 in the morning. He left the building without speaking to anyone. Park Sung-won watched him go from the conference room window with the expression of a man closing an account. The Beck Alliance, Park said, dissolved. Yuna is managing her father's situation with her own documentation. I've been told Chairman Beck will be occupied with certain legal and organizational matters in the coming weeks. Park nodded slowly. The girl. Mira, Jae-hyun said her name deliberately, correcting the category. Her documentation is filed. It'll be formalized within the month. Park looked at him. He was 61 and had seen 33 years of this structure, and he had the specifically weathered face of a man who had stored a great deal without processing it, and right now something was moving through that weathered surface. Your father, he said. Yes. He was... Park stopped. Tried again. I followed him for 22 years. I know. I didn't know. About the woman. About any of it. I know that too. Park was quiet for a moment, then, what do you need from me now? The same thing you've always given the Ryu name, Jae-hyun said. Stability, continuity, and the understanding that what's being asked of this organization going forward is different from what was asked before. Park looked at him for a long time. Different how? Jae-hyun thought about Nia in the hallway at 4 a.m, about Mira's jaw, about the specific irreducible weight of the word try. Better, he said. Park held his gaze. Then he nodded once, with the slow finality of a man making a decision that will cost him nothing he isn't willing to spend. 6 months later, Kwon Tae-oh was in Jeju. He had a small house. He did not contact anyone connected to the Ryu organization. He lived the specific, muted life of a man who has been stripped of his context and is learning, late, what remains when the context is gone. The Beck situation resolved itself in the way these things resolve, not cleanly, not satisfyingly, but completely. Chairman Baek Dae-won faced legal difficulties relating to certain financial arrangements that Yuna's documentation had made available to specific prosecutors. Baek Yuna exited the engagement and the family arrangement and relocated to London, where she had been educated and where she had, it emerged, maintained a life that was entirely her own. She sent Jae-hyun one message. I hope it was worth the difficulty. He wrote back. It was. She didn't respond, which seemed right. Mira's documentation was finalized on a Tuesday in March in an attorney's office in Gangnam. She sat next to her mother and across from Jae-hyun and signed her name on 3 separate documents with the particular, focused attention she brought to everything, and when it was done, she capped the pen and set it on the table and looked at the documents for a moment. Bellamy Ryu, she said, reading the hyphenated name. You don't have to use both, Nia said. It's just what the document... I like it, Mira said. She looked at Jae-hyun. Both. He nodded. She put the pen down and looked at the window and appeared to process something privately, and then the processing was apparently complete, and she picked up her phone and texted someone, which Jae-hyun had come to understand was her primary method of declaring a moment finished and moving forward. The anger had come, as Nia had predicted it would. It came 3 weeks after the alley, on a Sunday morning, and it was specific and articulate and fair. Mira sat across from him in the Mappo apartment kitchen, the first time he'd been allowed into that space, and she told him exactly what his absence had cost her, in the specific, unadorned way she told people everything. She didn't yell, she didn't cry. She held his gaze and said, You were a question I had to pretend wasn't a question. And that's something you did to me before you even knew you were doing it, and I'm telling you because I think you need to know it. He had sat in it. He had not explained or justified or contextualized. He had said, I know, I'm sorry. And then he had said nothing else, because nothing else was available. She had looked at him for a long moment after that. Then she had said, okay, and picked up her phone. He had driven home and sat in his car in the parking structure of his Gangnam building for 20 minutes before he could make himself go inside. He attended her school debates from the back row. He never told her he was coming. He would arrive, find a seat in the back where he could leave quietly if needed, and watch her take the opposing team apart with the specific, systematic pleasure of someone who genuinely enjoyed the mechanics of argument. She was very good. She knew it and didn't perform knowing it, which was better than being good. He never bought her anything. Nia had told him, early, that Mira would receive gifts as attempts to purchase standing, and that purchasing standing was not available to him, and attempting it would set everything back. He brought food sometimes to the apartment when he was invited. Not gifts, just the things that needed to be carried when you were coming to someone's table. He learned what Mira didn't like, which was most sweet things and anything with a texture she described as wrong. He remembered this. Nia did not make it easy. He had not expected her to. She made it possible, which was different and harder, and the only version he'd earned. There were evenings at the kitchen table that went well, and evenings where something in the air between them was too full of what it was, where 15 years sat down with them like an uninvited guest, and everyone at the table knew it was there and managed around it. On those evenings, he went home without lingering, because lingering would have been for him and not for them. He was learning the difference. In October, exactly 1 year after the atelier, Mira turned 15. Nia called him on Thursday morning. He answered on the first ring. Dinner, she said. Saturday, 7 o'clock. Okay. Don't bring anything. Okay? A pause. Mira wants you there. Another pause, shorter. I want you there. It was the first time she had said that. Not permitted, not allowed, but wanted. He registered the difference in the specific internal way of someone receiving something they had stopped expecting and needed a moment to hold. I'll be there at 7, he said. He wore the same suit he'd worn to the atelier a year ago, then changed into something less like a declaration. He walked from a parking spot 2 blocks away. He had been parking 2 blocks away since March because arriving in the G-Wagon outside her building felt wrong, felt like an imposition of his world on hers. And he preferred the 2-block walk through Mapogu streets that were becoming, with repetition, familiar in the way only walk streets become familiar. Nia opened the door. She was wearing dark red, her hair down, and she looked at him in the doorway with an expression he had been trying to read for a year, and tonight was the first time he thought he might be reading it correctly. Not open, not closed, but present. Actually, fully present. The expression of a person who has decided to stop managing the distance between herself and something she has not yet decided how to name. 7 o'clock, she said. To the minute, he said. She stepped back and let him in. The apartment was warm. The kitchen smelled of food, real food, the kind that had taken time and attention. The table was set for 3 with the good plates, the ones that didn't match, which was somehow better than if they'd matched. A small cake on the counter. Candles not yet lit. Mira came out of her room in a sweater he hadn't seen before, basketball shoes, her hair pulled up. She looked at him with the evaluating directness that had not softened in a year. It wasn't meant to soften, it was meant to see. And then she gave him a single nod of acknowledgement and went to the refrigerator. You can sit, she said, not looking at him. You always stand by the wall like you're waiting to be dismissed. Nia made a sound that was definitively a suppressed laugh. He sat. Dinner was the 3 of them at the small table in the warm kitchen, the city outside doing what it always did, the rain that had been following this family for a year having finally decided tonight to stay away and leave the sky clean and dark above Mapogu. They ate. Mira talked about a tournament, regional 2 weeks out, and she had opinions about the opposing team's defensive rotation that she delivered with the focused confidence of someone who had done the analysis and trusted it. Nia asked questions she already knew the answers to because she liked hearing Mira explain things. Jaehyun ate and listened and spoke when he had something to say, and did not perform attentiveness because he wasn't performing anything. When the plates were cleared, Nia brought the cake. It was small. The kind of cake that was made for 3 people and didn't pretend otherwise. 15 candles. Mira looked at it with the expression of someone who had publicly outgrown caring about candles on cakes and had privately not outgrown it at all. Nia lit the candles. Mira looked at them. The light moved across her face, his eyes, his jaw, and something else that was entirely and only hers. Something built from 15 years of Naya and basketball and wrong-textured food and answering her own questions and carrying her mother's secrets and filing things under resolved until they weren't. She raised her glass. It was water. The gesture was entirely Mira. The slight ceremony of it, the deliberateness, the refusal to be unselfconscious about something she meant. To Mom, she said, who never gave up. Nia looked at her daughter. Her face was very still in the candlelight, the particular stillness of a person experiencing something too large for expression. And to Appa, Mira said, looking at Jae-hyun. The word landed in the room. Appa. Not his name, not the man. Appa. The word that contained a relationship, a role, a decision she had made privately, and was now making public in the specific, irreversible way Mira made all her decisions, which was by stating them plainly and not looking away. He looked at her. Who is trying? She finished. He didn't speak. He was not sure he could have. He looked at his daughter across the birthday cake, and the candles threw their small light between them, and the word she had said was still in the air of the kitchen. He picked up his glass. His hand was not steady. He was aware of this, the slight, involuntary tremor of a hand that had been steady through recordings and alleys and sealed files and 38-minute calls and parking structures. Steady through everything because being steady was the thing he did, the thing he had built himself around, the architecture of his entire adult life. It was not steady now. He held the glass anyway. He held it with both hands if he needed to. He held it until the tremor passed, and then he raised it to meet theirs, and the 3 glasses touched over the birthday cake with its 15 candles. Nia looked at him above the glasses. Her eyes were bright, not with tears, with the specific wakeful brightness of a person who is fully in a moment and knows it and is choosing not to look away. Happy birthday, she said to Mira. Mira blew out the candles. The kitchen went dim and warm and quiet, and the city outside went on as it always did, and the Korean Mafia boss who had walked into a bridal atelier 1 year ago to buy a dress for another woman sat at a small table in a Mapogu apartment and breathed. And the breath was not controlled and not performed and not managed. It was just breath. His daughter cut the cake.